Hi, everyone. Shortest speech of my life, and I got a round of applause. That's awesome. Wow, what a last few weeks we've had, huh? 50 degrees. I'm not ready for snow. I don't know. You would think I would be. It's Minnesota. We'll probably get it in May. But we're not here to talk about the weather today, are we? Nope. I recognize about half of y'all, but if I haven't met you, my name is Nicole E. Soukup, and I'm the assistant curator of contemporary art and the coordinator for the Minnesota Artist Exhibition Program here at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. Thank you all for making your way here this afternoon to hear today's conversations with our speakers. Sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, programs like this are not possible without your support, so thank you. Today's conversation with Andrea Carlson and Jaune Quick-to-See Smith is part of the larger exhibition, The Lyrical Artwork of Jim Denomie. The lyrical artwork surveys the artist's singular vision, signature style, over the second half of his career. What was once intended as a mid-career survey was cut short, too short. Jim drew inspiration from lived experiences, pop culture, Anishinaabe traditions, and American histories to tell compelling narratives that depict his experiences of being Native in America. Despite the emotional weight of his subject matter, the artist's dry wit opened space for necessary conversations about the legacies of colonization and the nature of humanity. And in fact, I was just recently asked what makes Jim's work so special, and is that he found the humanity in history, something that is often quickly stripped and removed. And whether you want to charge that to the legacies of colonization or the brevity of education, I think both are accurate. But Jim was very quick to remind us that people are complex, and those complexities are what make us who we are. So, as I stated, this program today is for Jim. The exhibition runs through March 24th, and if you haven't seen it, well, you're in luck. It runs through March 24th. And the catalog is for sale in the gift shop. We just got a fresh delivery, so not a subtle plug, but a plug. Thank you. I would be remiss if I did not begin our conversation this afternoon without sharing my gratitude. My many thanks to Jaune and her son Neil Ambrose Smith and everyone at her studio for making the recording possible. And today, Jaune was unable to join us, but we did record an interview with her, a conversation with her, which is about 30 minutes in length. And I'll reiterate that when we get closer to it. I also want to thank Andrea Carlson, who is here today. Andrea, thank you for making time before this talk, your labor that went into this talk, and thank you for always being such an amazing resource for so many of us in this community. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Applause is always welcome. To Todd Bockley, Emily Marslek, and everyone at Bulkley Gallery, thank you for your assistance and support with this endeavor. To Jim's family, his wife Diane, the kids, the grandkids, thank you for allowing us these last few months with Jim's paintings, his sketches, and sculptures. Your openness at a difficult period means more than words will ever express. And to Diane, especially, a big thank you. In particular for letting Jim and I ramble about Bob Dylan at your kitchen table while we ate bagels and the replacements. Oh, and Bonnie Raitt, and countless others. Thank you. My sincerest gratitude goes out to the entire Denomie family. I would also be remiss if I didn't thank our sponsors for the exhibition, United Health Foundation, Rosina Liu, and Milax Corporate Ventures. As I mentioned at the beginning of my introduction, this exhibition would not be possible without support and countless contributions from corporate foundations and members. But in particular, this exhibition and tonight's program would not be possible without me as staff. Registrar Megan Destinger, the prep crew, Jill Bloomer, our designer, and editor David Hastings, who reviewed every single label and put up with me when I made minor changes here and there. To Dr. Casey Riley, head of Global Contemporary, and to Dr. Katie Luber, the Niven and Duncan Macmillan president and director. This was the first exhibition that Katie approved as director in 2020, at a time when so much was left unknown. And with that, I'm going to introduce our guests so you don't have to keep hearing me ramble and trip over my own words. I would like to first say, as I mentioned earlier, John was unable to be here in person. But following today's recording, Andrea will join me on stage for a brief conversation and chat about Jim's work. I'm going to just be very forthright and say we're going to ask that you reserve any questions for after the talk, and you can join us in the galleries directly following. It just gets to be a little bit much at the front where there's not a lot of room up front. So just meet us just down the hall and take a left if you haven't been there before. Trust me, you can't miss Jim's show. And so, without further ado, Andrea Carlson is a visual artist who maintains a studio practice in northern Minnesota and Chicago, Illinois. Carlson's works primarily on paper, creating painted and drawn surfaces with many mediums. Her work addresses land and institutional practices, decolonization narratives, and assimilation metaphors in film. Her work has been acquired by institutions such as the Whitney Museum of Art, the Walker, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, the Denver Art Museum, and of course, MIA. Her work has been shown nationally and internationally. She was recipient of the 2008 McKnight Fellowship, a 2017 Joan Mitchell Foundation Painters and Sculptors Award, a 2021 Chicago Artidea Award, and the 2022 United States Artist Fellowship. Carlson is also the co-founder of the Center for Native Futures in Chicago. Jaune Quick-to-See Smith, citizen of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai nation, is an artist, curator, educator, activist, mother, and friend to many here tonight. Smith's works engages with contemporary modes of making and her idiosyncratic adaptation of abstraction to her reflections on American pop art and neo-expressionism. To start to list John's accolades, exhibitions, and collections, we would be well here until about 5 o'clock tonight. So I will just simply say, Jaune is unable to make it because she's about to open the third venue of the largest retrospective of her career, which was started at the Whitney and will be opening on February 29th at the Seattle Art Museum. And so with that, I will turn the stage over to Jaune Quick-to-See Smith. She brought her A game, and I will be quick to say that the video is edited for time, but in all fairness, I only asked one question. So you're not missing much. She came prepared with more stories, laughter, and even tears than I was even prepared for. And so you may hear me or her son in the background from time to time. And with that, Scotty, I'll let you take it from here. I worked closely with Jim on the exhibition, and throughout our time together, John, he spoke so highly of you. And I have to say, I watched an interview that you recently gave where you mentioned that folks might not know you, but the work you've created do have important stories. I don't know of a single student who went through the University of Minnesota who doesn't know your work. You are so beloved here in Minneapolis and in the area and at the University of Minnesota, and to the point where I think you are quite iconic for many of us. And Jim certainly spoke so highly of you and often credits you with some of those earliest exhibitions he was included in. And I'm wondering if you're open to it, I would love to know, because Jim was always a little, he always said it with a smile and with very few words, how y'all met. He said that you came to the university to talk to the students. And I'm just curious, what was your recollection of first seeing Jim's work or meeting him for the first time?
For those of us in the arts, anytime that we received an invitation, we usually took it because it meant that we would likely be able to meet with Native people there. That was always my concern, was would I be able to see work made by Native people? Would I be able to go to a gallery like Two Rivers or, Juanita Espinosa was so important in the work that she did. You just couldn't, we just can't measure the importance of her work there. And so whenever I would get to do that, go to Seattle, Chicago, San Francisco, New York, Phoenix, to do something else, have someone else pay my way, like a university or an arts commission. And then I would be sure to take lots of slides of Native artists that I collected. And then I could present those to the Native community to let them know they weren't alone, and to let them know that there were others of us out here making art that had significance, that was telling important stories. And so I think, at that time, Jim was very hungry to learn more, about Native American art. And so, I found, a friend who, was interested in the same thing I was interested in. And, we were all in the process of learning. It's like Jeffrey Gibson said the other day when I was did a conversation with him for a magazine. It's like Jeffrey said, we are all outsiders, meaning if we're not right there in our community or on the reservation, we're seen as we're seen as outsiders, in the sense that we're not there, so we're not, therefore helping when help is needed. And sometimes when we go home, we have to have a warm-up period because we haven't been there for a while, and people at home sort of resent that because life is difficult. And then we're out here wandering around having a good time is how they see it. And at the same time, we're outsiders in the mainstream community. So we don't fit there, we don't fit here. I know Jim felt that too. I know that he felt strongly that he was raised in the city in an urban environment, which 70% or more Native people are raised in the cities in an urban environment. I wasn't, so, but I didn't always live on my reservation. My father was a horse trader, and we lived at Hoopaw for a while, and then we lived at Muckleshoot, then we lived at Nisqually. So in that sense, I was an outsider too, because, I wasn't of those tribes, though I was in the same linguistic group. So Jim had that, he had that understanding and that same feeling, and he was just curious to know more about other Native artists who might be like himself and who might have things in common. And Jim and I found lots of things in common. And so I was trying to remember and make a list, and I won't remember all of them, but of the times that I ran into Jim, I'll say run into Jim, because we didn't have cell phones, so we couldn't keep each other. I ran into Jim at Grand Portage Voyageurs Festival in up in Grand Portage, and him and Diane were there at the powwow, and all of a sudden there I saw them at the powwow, and they invited me to come and stay with them in the cabin they had rented. So I was only there for part of a day, overnight, part of the next day with them. But every time I met with him and Diane, it was always filled with stories and conversation that we were anxious to share with each other and ask questions. And another time, I don't know what I was doing there, but I was in the Birch Bark bookstore with Jim, and I think maybe he just took me there to, well, I think he took me there actually. We were looking at books, and then Louise, at that time, this tells you how long ago it was, she had a little baby, and that was hers. So that tells you how long ago Jim and I were in that bookstore, and he wanted to take me next door, but Louise said the baby was sick. And so we spent an afternoon in the Birch Bark bookstore, which of course I loved.
Yeah.
And that's where I discovered in visiting with Jim that he and Louise were close friends. And by that time, Jim knew a lot about Ojibwe ways and, ceremonies and things like that. And then I think the last time I saw Jim, well, there were other times as well, but I was just trying to remember, like here, there, someplace else, I would run into him. I mean, there were occasions when he sent me a note on the computer when we had computers ahead of time. But this one, I didn't know he was going to be there. I was giving a talk in Montana at Montana State U in Bozeman, and Jim turned up in the audience, and was Joe Fedderson there? Or Corky was there? Corky was there. Anyway, there was a little group of us, and Susan was there.
Yeah.
Susan Stewart and her family. Anyway, we all went to some roadside diner, like what was that called? Denny's or something, for dinner. And Jim and Diane sat across from me. So we kind of caught up on news. And at that moment, Jim had cancer.
Yeah.
It was going through treatment. And we talked a little bit about that. But he tended to sort of just like push that off. He would mention it, and then I would, we'd talk for just a minute, and then because he, of course, felt like I'm gonna lick this. I'm gonna, this, I'll get this. And so, and I wanted it to be that way too. So so we just kept it, at a place where we all had hope, and kept him in our prayers. I can say that every time we met at one of these meetings, both of us always shared information, we both loved talking about Native politics, mainstream politics. We were always on the same page. We both had, like, I made some notes and I was going through my notes, and, he had commentary about, the boarding schools, because our families were involved in that. And, he talked about the sexual abuse, and, of course, we knew that our parents or grandparents had been beaten, and, many had been sexually abused. And so, we carried that. The other day, Joy and I emailed with each other, and she's recently had a death in her family, in her nuclear family, which has struck all of us. And so I've been sending notes to her, and we talked about how we carry this grief. And I said to her, I believe that we're born in grief. I think I know that's a harsh thing to say, but for those of us my age, that's really I knew when I was a young child that we were dying. I just wasn't sure when, but that Indian people just couldn't make it. I hate to put it, I don't want to leave it on this note, but I think that Jim and I both saw so much grief on the reservation and off the reservation, both of us. And I spent all my adult life going home. My cousin founded Salish Kootenai College, Gerald Slater, and later Joe McDonald came in as president, who was a great help to the college. And but that was really important. It was a learning process for me, like Jim talked about, going home and going through the ceremonies. My cousin was married to a Blackfeet, and we would go, Neil and I would go every summer up to Badger Creek, outside of Browning, and go through the ceremonies up there. We just learned so much. So when I say this, I think that we're born in grief, and we carry grief all of our lives, and we die in grief. That had a lot to do with Jim and I corresponding, and also always spending time in conversation together, because we had many things that we could share like that. And on the other hand, both of us stand as role models. I will admit to that, that Jim taking that experience and turning it into something so beautiful, so hopeful as his artwork, and sometimes comedic, I could say, like drama and comedy, are, they're like this. You can see my face. And and that's what they say in the theater too. And you could say that about Jim's work and the stories that he was telling us. So I was giving you some background on our years of friendship and how much it meant. I always saw him as a peer. I never saw Jim as a as me as the mentor. I had some people say, oh, Jim talked about, no, I wasn't Jim's mentor. We were peers, and we shared stories together. And I valued his stories just, as much as, anything in my life, because he was so thoughtful, insightful, so smart, so courageous, so loving. My God, he was a loving friend. If you
Yeah.
had if you had Jim, I don't want to stop here and get tearful, but if you had Jim for a friend, it was a friend. He was the most loyal friend you could have. I can say that. So in terms of his paintings were, um, filled with information, with stories, layers of information. Somebody had written that, they were cluttered or like muddled or something. I never saw them that way. If I came to a painting before I saw the title, I would, stand and study the painting. I felt that his paintings were never cluttered or muddled. They often were filled with figures, but it was like telling a big story with layers. And so if you started over here, you might see, oh, I think I know what this story is about. But then when you came over here, you would see like a new vignette and you would say, oh, yeah, of course, that's fitting, that belongs with this. And then, you would make a bigger picture. I think he was making, like Kurosawa,
Yeah.
the Japanese filmmaker. I know that might sound like an odd way to describe Jim's work, but when you would see an image of a film, like a film clip, if you took just one image, one still, let's say, you might see like Jim's had that kind of graphic vastness, of a part of a story. They weren't stories that had beginnings or endings like that. And I always say that about mine as well. There is no beginning, no ending, because it's just a slice of life. But that's what his were. They were, but they were about something important in our history, whether it was present day right now, or whether, like Standing Rock. He talked about that on one of his films, and the the anger he felt about how despicable the police were, spraying water on a group of people, who weren't doing any harm at all. And it'd be 28 degrees and they'd spray water on them, cold water on them. I mean, that's today. That's today's world. And that's a kind of treatment that Native people are getting. And of course, this went out around the world of what was happening to Native people in America. And, I've been asked over and over again in these different interviews, I've been asked, well, um, you know, uh, um, what's changed? Because like all of a sudden we're seeing Native people in the news a little bit, like we never used to see Native people. The museums are suddenly waking up and starting to maybe collect some Native art. Generally we see about 6 natives out there that are in the news all the time, like they're the representative of all the Native communities, and but they're the favorite of the media. And I keep saying to them, there are hundreds of other Native artists that that aren't known yet. And part of it is about our economic situation. A lot of Native artists who, you know, have a studio in their kitchen or in their living room, and, you know, they don't have the means to, you know, buy a lot of expensive supplies like the mainstream. So we have a situation here that has been changing just recently. And thank goodness Jim lived long enough to just catch the, you could say, the tip of the iceberg. You could say, you could say that he just lived long enough to see this change where there was interest in his work. And of course, Todd Bulkley is a really kind, wonderful dealer who cared so much about Jim and was so helpful in bringing his work into the light, doing exhibitions and advocating for his work. And what a thrill that was. I mean, even Jim had to be shocked at the sudden change out here in the art world. It's, you know, I'm still pinching myself.
Yeah.
Because I spent 50 years just, you know, traveling around introducing Native artists at museums that, you know, said they had never met an Indian before. I mean, I can't begin to tell you the racist comments over the years of, well, I've never met one. I didn't know Indians were still alive. I mean, those of us who are working in the arts in the field, all of us, we've talked about that, Joy Harjo and myself, Jim and Joe Feddersen and Peter Jemison. I mean, we all struggled all those years in just trying to get exhibitions. If we could rent a small space and do Native exhibitions, which is what Peter Jemison did in New York for quite a few years, you know, that was the life of a Native artist, poet, writer, performer. You know, we were our art tribe. That's what we were. We were an art tribe. And so when Jim joined us, you know, he was, of course, you know, everybody loved him, and he was friends with everybody, and he traveled a lot. I mean, boy, he really made up for lost time. He was here, there, everywhere, and doing exhibitions. But then when it started to open up, I was going to say George Floyd, Standing Rock, Black Lives Matter changed the scene. I mean, we really needed that help from the African American community, and I doubt that they really know how much help they gave us, because it was a culmination. What do you say? Perfect storm. Like all of these things came together at the same time, and all of a sudden the museums were going, oh, we don't have any Native collection here, or they only have antiquities. And so suddenly everything like changed. It felt like overnight, like in this past decade. And it was shocking to all of us. Like, I mean, I'm not kidding. Like you know, the Whitney Museum and the retrospective is like, it's like a dream, like almost like I just dreamed that it happened, and it's not real, because everything changed overnight. And at that time, Jim was dealing with, you know, his chemo and you know what was happening, but he still kept painting, and he still kept working, and he still kept showing. I mean, he was like, no, I'm not stopping now. And he did. So he's left us with a legacy that is going to go on into the future. And his stories are they are bits of history, history that spans, you know, that spans today's world, and you know, and the, you know, past with the ancestors. And then also, when you look at his work, there's a timelessness about it because it's going to go on into the future. And the beauty of it is that we'll be able to, and the stories may change somewhat because as people interpret them, and what history they know, like I was doing another interview a couple days ago, and I used the word multi-culti, and when they wrote the word down, they wrote multi-county, and I said, oh, that's because they are from a different generation, and they don't know what that means. And so what's going to happen is Jim's stories will get reinterpreted, and they're going to be timeless because the images that we see in there, even Tonto and the Lone Ranger, you'd have to be born in the 40s or 50s to know that that was on TV. And of course, there are old comic books. I have some of those too. When you talked to Jim or hung out with Jim, you would see that, and of course, when we talk together, the two of us, talking together and over the top of each other, is that, we were into the science, we were into the natural world, we were into animals, we were, we were all the time like that. We were into all these because they're all part of native life in the land as well. And I wish Jim could have been there with me when we did the show at the National Gallery. He would have been right there with me front and center. But I had his work there. That was really important to me, to have his spirit there, I could say.
Yeah.
So yeah, Jim's work is is going to be, it's good for our time. It's going to be good for the future. We're going to see other shows of Jim's work, and I want to see more critical writing, and I think that's coming. We're getting more and more young Native historians who have their PhDs. It left us with the legacy, is what he did.
Yeah.
And so he's going to be with us a long time. He's going to be with us. He's going off into the future. Jim is going to, he's around. Yeah. So that's where I would like to end right here.
That sounds perfect.
That he has an impact on our community. It's going to go on into the future. I can't say that about every artist. Like, does their work have content? Does their work, is their work telling us a story about something? Like Jim, took pride in telling stories that had meaning, that something he observed for himself, and he had his own opinion, and then he made a painting about that. He was recording history, and those in the future are going to grow even more important because we don't have other written records of a lot of this. And so what Jim is giving us is a legacy that is a pictorial record.
I can't imagine a better place to stop than there, Jaune. Thank you so much for your time and this was a beautiful moment and a beautiful hour for me. And so thank you for allowing me to listen. And also, as a curator, probably one of the easiest artist talks, because you hit every point before I could even ask a question. So thank you. I am left speechless, other than to say how grateful I am for your time and your generosity this afternoon.
Well, thank you for thanks to Jaune, thanks to her studio, And Andrea, you had a few images you'd like to share with us.
So as an attempt to, not be entirely vulnerable on stage, this is something that, I'm emotionally still processing the loss of Jim. I did prepare some slides. You can get my version, my take on some of the things that Jim was doing in his work. It's really hard to follow Jaune. At the same time, it's really, that was such a favor that she just did us because she covered everything. So now I don't feel like I have to. But I will say, I just wanted to acknowledge right off the front that this institution recently, I feel, wrongfully fired Bob Casalino, who is a very close friend. He was a champion for Native artists, and he looked out for us in a way that that is very rare in the art world. And I was a little bird named Marcia Cushmore suggested that there are these pamphlets that you can pick up at the front desk. You can fill them out if you have any feedback that you want to give the institution on this. You're more than welcome to fill them out. So I kind of wanted to start with some of Jim's early work. So when I first met Jim, when I was an undergrad at the University of Minnesota, maybe it was 2003, 2004, he came through one of the workshops. These earlier works are kind of his renegade work. You can see how reservations or native land is these kind of plateaus, and all of the stolen land has been scooped out. There's also, you can see a stadium. They also maybe represent fortresses, but just how the land is weaponized. This is, I think, really informative to how he uses work later on, because this is different. It's different from how he eventually thinks about ideas of fortresses and reservation land that is held communally by Native people versus those that make it into a fortress to keep Indigenous people out. You'll see this later in his large scale works where it becomes more of a fortress, like the attack on Fort Snelling, White Castle, and then on the other side you see the landscape as more of a site of oppression, a site of struggle. Fred Moten, who is a tremendous Black scholar, has this idea of the political surround, and how he talks about the political surround is you'll have something like a fortress. We've all seen Western films where there will be a fort, and the political surround are all of the natives that show up to antagonize that space. The false image that we get through a lot of these Western films, and I'm glad that Jaune brought out Kurosawa, because there's definitely a connection between Kurosawa's films and American Western genre, is that one of the false images isn't that natives showed up and were antagonizing those spaces, but that the fortress, the settlers, are portrayed as defending themselves, as just this point of self-defense, and that the antagonizers, the native folks, are the bad guys. But who is the bad guys when someone moves in and is harming an Indigenous community? That we've all been taught to force our perspective from within these powerful structures, inside the fort, inside the museum, and then we make our sympathies towards those fortresses. So I think that with the Standing Rock work and a lot of his work around politics, that's the political surround that Fred Moten is talking about. He's talking about those spaces that are held in contention, that we can still fight and we can still carve back the land. We can still take back in an inverse of those earlier works. There's another thing that he's doing that implicates all of us as witnesses, and we get to be witnesses going forward. One of the ways that he's addressing landscape is maybe a bird's eye view, maybe a red-winged blackbird's eye view of the landscape, where you can see a lot of vignettes across the land. But it's also like maybe a drone or surveillance eye view. And what does that mean as far as forcing us into this perspective of bearing witness to these landscapes? I would also say that there are, way before drones existed, there were artists, Artemis Bosch on the left, and Peter Bruegel, the elder, on the right, who used landscapes in a similar way, where you could get many vignettes, many activities happening throughout the landscape. And this is something, these are also that drone's eye view, this maybe a low-flying bird's eye view, to get as much packed in the landscape as possible. And I think that he's using landscape, organizing landscape that way. And I'm saying this because I love these painters. He would probably be citing Stu Mead or Chris Mars if he was here right now, but these are what I'm saying. This is me projecting. There's also work like by Frank Big Bear, who also treats the landscape in a similar way. One of the things about Jaune Quick-to-See Smith's work is she doesn't do a lot of landscapes. She doesn't let you in. She doesn't give you a horizon land. Everything's up front. And she's like, no, you don't get to possess our land. You don't get in. You have to stay out. So she addresses the landscape in a very different way than myself and George Morrison and Frank Big Bear or Jim. In the fact that she puts denial into that space, into that picture plane. And I think it's really brilliant. I acknowledge it, but we're not doing that. We're letting you in, if not to surround. I just love them buns. I feel like I should just let this just awkwardly, sit upon the audience for a little minute. This is a piece that was removed from the state capitol in Minnesota, in St. Paul. This piece, it's not the political surround. We're on the, if you're Native, you're behind enemy lines. You do not want to be here. But it's also how this type of landscape has been used historically as propaganda as well. And I think that he's very familiar with that language. He's utilizing it. Recently, during Valentine's Day, I was here in the museum, and you could put a heart in front of the work that you love. And so I wanted to include this image to show that, I was busy running around gathering hearts from other pieces and throwing them. I'm sorry. And if the idea of a witness, of putting the kind of onus on the audience to bear witness to these things that are happening, is lost on any of us, or you're not buying my argument here, he literally made for his McKnight a viewing platform to force a perspective onto us. This piece in particular is, when he first explained it to me and what was going on, I was like, okay, it was something that I didn't really understand what he was doing. I thought he was just kind of freely associating, but he had this idea of where creativity comes from, where artists all connect. And so his idea was that, we're on this astral plane, and we all, artists, stick our head into the big creative oven, and then our heads emerge up the chimney into this other plane of existence where ideas are, where inspiration is, where we influence each other, and our little heads pop up in this other realm. So it's like two paintings, but it's this creative process and how we all have access. And when he was talking to me on the phone about it, he was like, your head's up in there, my head's up in there. And he's like, and we can kind of see each other, and we kind of get each other in this different way. And I was like, yeah, I guess I kind of I mean, but sticking your head in the oven, that sounds, I don't think you're supposed to do that. It's not our, it's not our ways. Um, I will direct you to an image just past the oven. It's cut off a little bit on the lower left. There's a dude sticking his head in the oven, and there's a couple on the couch with a cat on their lap. He likes to nest other paintings into other paintings. So I will show that image in a minute. But I'd like to imagine that my head is one of those heads popping up in the upper, but I don't know which one would be me. I know it's not the mad. Um, then there's this category of works that I would call natives doing native-y things, or like just chilling or relaxing. I think Jaune was kind of talking about, like, it looks like we're all just out here, you know, enjoying ourselves and just being. And it's like, yeah, well, that's what we want. That's kind of the goal, is like there's some really terrible oppression and racism happening. There are efforts to counter that and work towards it, of betterment for our environments and for all of our lives. And there's that struggle, and who bears the struggle. And then there's like, well, what do we want? What do we want at the end of this? We want agency, we want representation, we want visibility, or we want to go canoeing naked. We want to hang with our friends, and we want to enjoy each other's company. And I think that there's a whole category of his work where it's funny, but it's also that radical idea of being, of existing with each other, and how important that is, that we have these moments of joy and love, and that it is not all struggle. So I think he gives us, with any good parody, you have to have these moments of rest, and he allows us these spaces as well. To bring it back to the idea of a witness, because we are witnessing these joyous spaces as well as the harmful spaces. There's an artist named Rose B. Simpson, and she makes these really beautiful terracotta sculptures, and their eyes are kind of carved out, and they're she calls them witnesses. And she says that a lot of collectors, you know, post everyone needing work by Native artists, a lot of really, really wealthy collectors, a lot of really wealthy museums that'll buy her work. And since it's kind of these, the sculptures are cylindrical and tall, they always kind of get pushed into the corners, museums or collectors' homes. So the eyes of these witnesses are watching all of the settler nonsense. They're hanging out in the corner, and they're watching the wealth of the collectors that have purchased these things. They're witnessing what's happening. They're being put in museums, and they're looking at, you know, the harm of those spaces, or they're looking at how the wealth works out in those spaces. But these are her witnesses, and they have this special charge to them. After Jim walked on, I was noticing on Facebook and social media how many of Jim's works were owned by regular folks, not the wealthy or necessarily the museums, but just regular folks who are like, this is my Jim Denomie painting a day portrait that they would post on social media. And I don't know who in the room owns work by Jim Denomie. Just raise of hands. You know, that's phenomenal. That is absolutely phenomenal. How many own my work? Just kidding, there's like 2. But he was prolific, and his, I mean, I make 20-foot works now, so if you have a house for it. But I feel like his work is not, it's a witness to your home maybe, but not in a way that Rose's is. It's almost like a guest, like you've invited him into your homes in a different sort of a way. And And I feel like that's really, it's really beautiful and remarkable that so many people get to carry him, almost physically in their homes. To contrast with Rose. These are the pieces some of the pieces I own more of Jim's work, but if you recognize them and miss them, they're in my home. But I think that there's just something really cool about that. There's something really, really cool that people get to live with Jim's work and carry him along. As I promised, this is one of my favorite pieces. You can see like the other works of his on his wall, the contentness of the animals, just everything about this is just, it's just one of my favorite pieces for that, like the beauty of content, the radical nature of that moment, where we can just exist in spaces with each other and enjoy each other's presence and love and company. I wanted to end on that, but I'm sure there's questions.
I have so many questions, mainly where can I find a 20-foot wall? But for your work. But I think I just I have just one or two, if the audience will permit me. And I wonder, I think what I heard in your beautiful remarks this afternoon was witnessing, but it also seems like there's a vulnerability in putting out both joy and honesty. Would you agree that there's power and vulnerability in being out front?
I think that, I mean, after Jim and I had, it was my first museum show and his second, I think, here at MIA. It's interesting that I remember like right after that, we just did so many artist talks together. We've spoken, a lot of people in this room are professors, and we came to your classrooms and we, exchanged ideas. We did our slide presentations. We got so used to doing this together, like speaking together, that we could almost say each other's presentation. And then like afterwards, it's like, you forgot to say that one joke, or you forgot to, we would give each other like, stage director insights. But one of the things I remember him saying quite often, like as far as a motivating factor and why he makes his work, is he's like, I'm angry. He's like, I see this stuff, I am witness to this stuff, and I'm angry. And so it was part of why he was doing what he was doing, is he was processing some really big emotions. I remember his sister had walked on around the time that we were doing our show together, and he was starting to really utilize this like dreamlike imagery. You'll see it again and again, where it's like a line of horses, and I think he was processing grief, and he was also kind of accessing this other space, where very almost ceremonial, way of processing certain emotions. He also processed his anger through humor, just a spoonful of sugar, to go along with some of the more tragic emotions and imagery that he was putting out there. But I'm, as far as like vulnerability, I feel like there was part of him that like, this is where like the strength and the shield kind of maybe came from as well. He would often talk about how like his if he had a first reader or first audience or first viewer, that would be natives. He kind of wanted to impress other native artists, and artists were part of that community of people that he was accountable to when he would make his work. So I work that way too. Like sometimes I'll like, all right, this is going to rock Jim's world. I would make something, and it's like, we would make something with your peers in mind, and so and And so I think that as far as vulnerability, there was also like just so much strength derived from his work, and he was trying to, you know, inject all of us in the community with some of that strength behind his work. And it's also like we see like the witness isn't just on us doing his work, but that he was, you know, he was witnessing, he was watching the news, he was seeing all this stuff coming in from Standing Rock, and before with the Minneapolis Police Department putting Native people in trunks of cars and things like that. Like he was a witness to all of this, and he's like, no, we see you. And so he was painting these things to also kind of process his own being a witness of these things.
Yeah, and I think that also touches upon the second question I had, which is, I think I'm Adrienne Marie Brown, a scholar who is also from the Twin Cities and now resides in Detroit and in a few other places, talks about joy as the best act of resistance. And in doing so, the speaker needs to be vulnerable, to go there, to tap into that anger, or tap into those emotions. And I think that in turn becomes, when done well, a reciprocal dialogue. And I think you said it better than I ever could. So, and I'm not trying to tap out, but rather just in the interest of time, I just wanted to ask you the worst question, maybe. Do you have a favorite piece by Jim?
Well, remote is high up there. I don't know, because it just seems like everything. I'm always weird about anything favorite, because once you're like, yeah, this is the one I love, then every other thing that you see, like, you know.
Oh yeah, or you see another one, you're like, no, I love this one too. And
I have to say his the sketchbook works are just like the speed and the, you know, where he could have an idea and then immediately sketch it down. I even think of like this, if you want to put, you know, your comments. When I was opening this up, I was like, if Jim was here, he would draw a picture and it would be cutting. People would get a paper cut. If Jim was here, there would be a drawing. And but I you know, I think about that. Actually, that's something that is whenever I lose people, it seems like I carry them for a very long time, and I'll like check in with them. I'll like, oh, you should have saw that movie. Or when Jaune Quick-to-See Smith was speaking at the Whitney for the opening of her show, she was on a stage with the director of the Whitney, explaining to him what a snag bag was. And that was like a moment in the back of my head, like, damn, I wish Jim was here. A snag bag is a condom.
do we want to end there?
Sure.
Well, thank you all for coming, and to the Minneapolis Institute of Art. As I mentioned, Jim's show is up through March 24th. And if you are here in the galleries, I also really recommend the Gordon Parks Ella Watson exhibition on labor, which is just upstairs. And so thank you all. And the comment cards that Andrea so helpfully mentioned are available at our visitor information services desks, the front desks, and actually our wonderful colleagues here have some by the doors as well. So thank you all, and we will see you in the galleries in just a few moments.